We don't think of expeditions, scientific expeditions, much anymore, unless maybe you're going to the moon or Antarctica. Natural scientists have often done expeditions. Some are very large scale, some are very small scale, where they've gone to places for concentrated periods of learning. And so I initiated pulses. I really initiated them initially as a team building activity, but also as an activity which would allow us in a very short period of time to accumulate a large amount of information about a place, typically a new place. We've had many pulses here at Mount St Helens over the years. The first 3 years following the eruption, we had very large groups of people that we brought together. And again, we did it on the 20th and 25th and now on the 30th anniversary.
Let me tell you a little bit about what a pulse is. They've been going on for quite some time, for decades, and the forefather of pulses is amongst us tonight, Dr. Jerry Franklin. But let's talk more specifically about Mount St. Helens pulses, which began in the early 80s under the leadership of Jerry, Fred, and Jim Siddell. And so here we are 30 years later carrying on the tradition that those folks had started. There's going to be vegetation studies in several, perhaps most of the disturbance zones by many different PIs and their crews. There'll be work on fungal ecology, on herbivory, on mammals, on birds, on amphibians, stream ecology, limnology of Spirit Lake, geomorphology and hydrology, and soils, and probably more.
So we've gathered here for the 30th anniversary pulse at Mount St. Helens. We've been trying to hold these every 5 years with the intent of keeping a 5-year sampling pace up for many of the studies. Some studies are being kept pace at an annual scale. But also we're here because we want to keep the community of scientists involved in work at Mount St. Helens closely knit. And the 30th anniversary is a particularly important juncture because the first generation of researchers, such as myself, is approaching retirement, and it's time to bring on a new cohort of researchers. We have long-term studies we want to keep going. We have studies that were begun early and then left to languish, and we'd like to renew some of those. And also some phenomena have expressed themselves in the landscape, phenomena that we didn't set out to study from the get-go, in part because they've not been manifest on the land.
Pulse is just an amazing time. It's a social time when you get to meet new colleagues and you get to catch up with colleagues that you haven't seen possibly since last Pulse, and you get to discuss new ideas. It's a time for interdisciplinary communication where the upland veg people can talk to the folks who are out on the pumice plains working with primary succession. We get to share our stories about secondary succession. We get to talk to the wildlife people and see how the veg might be interacting with the wildlife, and just hear an amazing number of different stories from so many different disciplines. And there's a lot of work together in the field during the day, but then everyone retires back to Tower Rock at night, and we get to talk around the fire then and over dinner. The older generations of scientists interact with the younger generation and share their experiences from over the decades of research here. And so it really is a very perfect situation for interaction and communication and planning future collaborations.
If you don't have a period during the pulse when you bring the people back together to share with each other and to communicate with each other, it isn't really as effective. You get the data, each individual group going out and doing their thing, but you don't get the integration, and it's out of the integration. It's out of the interface between the disciplines where the real discoveries emerge.
This pulse is a first for us. It's quite unusual. We have about 120 scientists ranging from grad students and actually children of researchers helping in the field on through senior scientists. But we also have a dozen writers from around the country. So while they're here, the writers have gone out with scientific teams to take part in the field and see the business of doing science. An important part of engaging the writer community is that there are many ways of learning and there are many ways of knowing, and we've invested a great deal using the tools of science for learning in this landscape. And it's about time we brought in people with some other tools, and actually we feel that's an obligation for landscapes such as this, where learning is one of the primary objectives.
Mount St Helens has been a really profound learning experience and is continuing to be. Every time we think we've pretty much mined it out as far as learning things, we have some new discoveries and new epiphanies where our whole view of how things work undergoes some significant change. One of the National Park Service folks sort of redefined it as taking the pulse of an ecosystem. Just using the word in that way, and it works that way too.